Welcome to Dolby Creator Talks. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. We're continuing our coverage of the 97th Academy Awards. Today, we are joined by Oscar-winning production sound mixer Simon Hayes, who is nominated for his third Academy Award for his work on Wicked. A few weeks ago, we were able to talk with director John M. Chu and the post-production sound team on Wicked. But because of everyone's busy schedules, we weren't able to talk with Simon about capturing the sound during production until just a few days ago, and I am so glad that we did. Simon won his first Academy Award for his work on Tom Hooper's Les Misérables, which was another challenging movie musical featuring live singing on set during production, as Wicked does. I started our conversation by asking Simon what he learned during Les Mis that informed his approach to Wicked. Here's Simon Hayes.
Well, before we get into the technical aspect, which of course is really important, there's just something that I've got to say that has really, really helped. And that's throwing away this idea that on a musical movie, the music department and the sound department are two different entities. And what we really learned on Les Misérables was that we had to be one cohesive, creative team working together. We both, of course, have exactly the same desires that the movie sounds great. But historically, traditionally, the music department and the sound department would always be treated separately by production. Exactly. And we wouldn't always be singing from the same hymn sheet. And what I really learned and what was incredibly fortunate about Les Mis was that myself and the music department kind of from the get-go realized that we needed to treat it very differently. And we put our two teams together. We introduced all of the assistants and we said, listen, guys, you are one big team. And we've got, we're here to help each other. And we're here to realize Tom Hooper's vision, which was a completely live musical without any tempo, which we'll talk about more in a moment. But, there was lots of teamwork that needed to happen. And so I took that idea onto Wicked, and it was really, really important that, and the other thing that's great, Glenn, when you do it like that is you suddenly get a department that's twice as big. And if you're twice as big, you're twice as effective because everyone is given their own role. Everyone is there to help each other. And it's just a much more positive way of working. And you can just deliver far better tracks. Moving on to the technical aspect, what I learnt about Les Mis was about how to go off tempo. Before we start talking about microphones and microphone technique, let's talk about the music and let's talk about the fact that when we were on Les Misérables, we basically had to ignore tempo completely and allow the actors to set their own pace. Now, obviously, that sounds like it's going to be a disaster. But we basically decided we were going to have a couple of secret workarounds to stick to tempo. And we weren't going to, we were still going to absolutely let the actors lead us. But the couple of tricks that we learned was, number one, we'd kind of do the first take and Tom Hooper would say to the actors after the first take, so how was that tempo wise? And I'd walk onto the set with the music supervisor and we'd kind of say, yeah, how did that feel with regards to the speed of the keyboard? And the actors would say, well, we could go slightly faster. And so Tom would say to the pianist, okay, let's do take two. Let's go slightly faster, but please don't start leading the actors. If they want to take a moment, give them the moment. So we do take two and we just go, 10, 12% faster. And we'd walk onto the set after take two and Tom would say to the cast, how was that, guys? And they'd say, yeah, that felt really good. Let's continue at that pace. Now, what we were doing secretly was we were recording that keyboard onto Pro Tools. And so we were basically secretly tempo locking. And what was interesting about that was we then said for take three, between the sound department and the music department, okay, so from action, we're going to play back off Pro Tools. We're going to play back the keyboard from take two. But the thing was, Glenn, we knew that if at any moment one of our cast members wanted to take an extra moment, then that Pro Tools playback would completely disobey what Tom and the cast wanted to do, which was have their acting lead the performance. And so what we did was, as well as playing back off Pro Tools keyboards, or off Pro Tools playback, we would also have the pianist playing, but that wasn't faded up into the cast IEMs. But the pianist knew exactly what we were doing. She was absolutely in on this, but she would be playing alongside, over the top of the Pro Tools playback, knowing that the moment one of the cast members just took that extra beat, then we would crossfade back to the live keyboard. And so then what we would do at the end of the take, we would take notes. We basically had a musical script supervisor who read music, and we would say, right, okay, so we were tempo locked from bar X to bar Y, but at bar Y we went live again. And so we, in the same way a script supervisor on a normal movie would be providing notes for editorial about camera angles, about focal length, about camera stop, and all of this different information, we were taking notes on Les Mis about when we were locked to tempo, what that tempo was, and what we were effectively doing was giving Tom Hooper exactly what he wanted, giving the cast exactly what they wanted, but at the same time, protecting them from having takes that were fantastic performance-wise, but not being able to be cut together because they were at completely different tempos. And so that's one of the lessons that we learnt regarding tempo lock. The next lesson that I learnt, again on the same subject of tempo, was although we're asking a pianist not to be led, and although we're asking the pianist not to dictate anything to the cast, what we must do is give them a metronome, give them a click track in an earwig, so that they at least know where we're trying to be. And there were times on Les Mis and times on Wicked where that IEM came out of the pianist and they realized that they just couldn't. But at least we've got a starting point. And so all of this is really interesting stuff, because it's creative details and technical details that a production sound mixer on a movie set would never normally come into contact with or never normally have to consider. But it was, the lifeblood of Les Mis, and on some scenes, the lifeblood of Wicked. And so really on Wicked, although we knew that we had, and we speak about lifeblood, let's talk about the DNA of Wicked. The DNA of Wicked is rhythmic pop tracks. That's the best way I can describe it. It's pop music, and it's beautiful, and it is what has had audiences around the world in the theatre engaged. And if we start to strip that back too much and go off tempo, we're going to lose something. But at the same time, we needed to know when we could allow Cynthia and Ari to go off tempo and let their emotions dictate the performance. I mean, a really great example is I'm Not That Girl. For the first verse of I'm Not That Girl, we were completely off tempo. And Cynthia, being the absolute professional vocalist that she is, as well as being a fantastic actress, knew what that meant for her. She knew how she could play with it. She knew how to take full advantage of that. And then when we get to the end of the first verse, we have to respect the tempo, because now we haven't just got a very, very sparse backing track. We've got something where the rhythm comes in and the drums start, and Greg Wells' fantastic backing track comes in. And that's where we would fade across in the same way as I've just described in Les Mis, where we would fade across from a Pro Tools tempo lock into a live keyboard. On Wicked, we were fading across at a certain point from that live keyboard, which gave Cynthia and Ari the ability to let their emotions completely dictate pace. But then at the correct point, we would crossfade across into Greg Wells's backing track and get back into that where we're respecting the tempo, the choreography starts, and suddenly we're into Wicked. We're into the pop music side of Wicked.
I'm so impressed with what you're saying, because basically you're saying like you developed a different approach for these more emotionally intense, intimate moments of singing versus, like, for instance, in the library, that's a huge production number, lots of people, big choreography, costumes. Obviously, you're not gonna let that go off tempo because of all the choreography and everything that's going on in a sequence like that.
Exactly. And actually we were off tempo right at the beginning of that. When Johnny goes into singing from dialogue, we were completely off tempo. If I remember correctly, as he jumps onto the table just before he kicks the book, we faded across from live keyboard into the backing track. And that really is when the choreography starts. So again, giving Johnny and everyone else the ability to act and let their emotions and their performance drive it until that last split second where choreography has to start, and we have to stay true to the tempo and respect the drums and respect the bass. And at that point, we do that very quick fade across. And so that really is, that's the music department and the sound department on the movie set really working as one cohesive unit. And all of my assistants are basically creating this technical support system for the music department, and that myself and the music department are working in a completely creative manner, knowing that my team are going to support. When I say support technically, I'm talking about with the microphones, with the IEMs, making sure that Johnny's got the right amount of reverb in his earwig, and that myself and the keyboard player and the music supervisor can just immerse ourselves in giving Johnny as much freedom as he wants up until that given point, and then getting straight into that tempo so that Myron, our picture editor, is not going to have trouble cutting from take to take, because when the drums come in, we're locked to tempo, and suddenly we've got the ability to go from take to take as we wish.
Tell me a little bit about your approach to, like, gain control, because one of the things I love about Wicked is how seamlessly, there's no break between spoken and singing in the film. That the actors are able to move seamlessly back and forth because they're live singing. But obviously, a singing voice is tremendously louder than a speaking voice. So, what's your approach to kind of maintaining control and making sure everything sounds good?
Let's rewind right back to the beginning of my career. I started as an assistant when we were still recording analog on a reel-to-reel Nagra. And just as I made the jump from boom operating to mixing, we went digital. So I was kind of the first generation of mixers who were starting in the digital domain, but I knew all about the analog domain because I'd been an assistant for 5 years in that domain. And what I wanted to do from the very start of my career was I wanted to use digits, and I wanted to use digital, the amount of dynamic range available to us. I wanted to mix as a digital mixer. What I didn't want to do was to mix in the same way that people would have mixed to a 1/4-inch analog tape, which I think at that point, a lot of people continued mixing in the same way. What I did was I brought everything down, and I trusted that 24-bit word length, and I trusted lower level recordings, and I gave more headroom, and that became something that I based my whole career on as a dialogue sound mixer. And so when I moved into musicals, it made complete sense to me. And basically, Glenn, I feel like I've failed if I hit a compressor limiter on a movie set. Okay, it's there. It's right up at the top there, at -6 dB full scale. It's there to save me and to save the original recording. But if I touch it, I feel like I've, I let a goal in, if you like. It's like this. It's like, oh boy, I don't want that to happen on the next take. And so the way I set my recording chain up is I set it up to record pretty low. And if I've got Cynthia in the scene, I'm setting microphones up so that they can deal with Cynthia Erivo at her loudest for that given song that she's going to sing. It means the dialogue is going to be pretty low in terms of the recording level on the 24-bit word length, but when I say low, it's not going to be wide. It's going to be closely mic'd. It's going to be, it's going to be rich. It's going to not have any equalization on that movie set whatsoever. I'm not EQing a thing. I don't presume to be able to EQ better than Sherps or DPA, and I certainly don't presume to be able to EQ into a set of location headphones better than Andy Nelson can EQ listening to a Dolby digital system in his theater. And so what I'm really trying to do for Andy is I'm trying to give him the rawest, closest, and I keep using the word close, Glenn, because on a musical, I don't want to allow much air around the microphones. I don't really want to celebrate camera perspective in the same way I would on, for instance, a costume drama, where it's kind of nice if the mid shots sound mid and the wide sound a bit wider. What I really want to do on a musical, because I know even if the actors aren't singing, we're probably going to have an incredible amount of emotional score. And I want John Marquis and Andy Nelson to be able to get that score in at the volume that they want and not be held back because I've put air around the microphones on the set. So what I'm effectively trying to do is to record everything tight, record everything without any EQ. I'm not even I'm putting a bass cut in at 60 hertz, which, as you know, and all the listeners know, that is well below the human voice. That's just there to avoid any sort of boom pole rumble or any plosives out of the, on a lav mic. But so I'm basically recording very flat. I'm recording very, very close, and I'm just trying to create really, really fantastic stems for Andy Nelson and John Marquis so that they can basically use that Dolby digital system to the best of their ability and not be held back by decisions that I've made on the movie set. Now, of course, that means that I need to be careful about how I present my tracks to Myron for the Avid process, because what I don't want is Myron to feel like he's always trying to chase my gain up because when people are speaking, they're down low. And so what I'm basically doing is I'm making sure that my ISO tracks have full dynamic range, but into Myron's mix track, which of course is going to have to exist as John Chu and Myron's window into this movie that we've made for 6 months before Nancy Nugent Title gets hold of my tracks and starts cutting them together. So what I'm doing there is I'm chasing the gain up on my mixer as I'm mixing. And although I'm leaving the ISOs quite low, I'm making the mix a bit hotter. And actually, because we had such a huge amount of dynamic range on Wicked, I did something unprecedented. I didn't just chase the gain up on the channel faders as I was mixing, but I actually put an extra 6 decibels of gain full stop across the board into my mix track so that I knew that Myron was getting enough signal to noise in Avid, but I also knew that I wasn't hitting unnecessary limiters in my ISO tracks for the sound post team.
That's amazing. So you kept both chains clean and usable for both picture editorial as well as what was going to be needed ultimately for post-production. Just tell me about a typical, I'm sure there was no typical day on Wicked, but tell me a little bit about your microphone setups and kind of how, what kind of, what your typical setup was on the show.
The typical setup was we would always start off with 2 booms, but we always had a 3rd boom and someone that could operate that boom. Sound utility, we call them a second assistant sound. So we had 2 boom operators at all times, and we would start every single scene with 2 booms out on poles ready. But the 3rd boom wouldn't just be kind of, we need a 3rd boom. Let's get it out the box. Let's rig it. It would be rigged. It would already be fed into my machine. It would already be presented with a fader. We were expecting the 3rd boom to come out 50% of the time. And it would always be in a boombox in the corner of the set, so that if suddenly we were presented with something like camera C looking at something that the first 2 booms couldn't get to, that boom would be out within 20, 30 seconds. It wouldn't be, whoa, hold on, we need 2.5 minutes to get a 3rd boom out. We were expecting to use it. We were putting lav mics on anyone that spoke. And if we felt that someone's performance, even if it wasn't a speaking performance, but they were doing something interesting with the way that they were breathing, or, you know, we'd have a lav mic on them. And for anyone that was singing, the rule was we would always have 2 lavs on them at all times.
2 lavs on the people who were singing. Interesting. Why?
Yeah.
But just for placement, or why 2 lavs?
For different reasons, actually. But let's start off with Ari. Ari's costumes, beautiful costumes that Paul Tazewell designed. Galinda has a lot of frilly stuff. You know, it's all pink and it's frilly and it's chiffon and it's beautiful, but it's noisy.
Noisy.
Yeah. So the first thing that we did was in fact, before we even start talking about why 2 lavs, I went to Pablo Hellman, our VFX supervisor, and I asked him to do exactly the process that we did on Les Misérables, which was to paint out the lav mics. Now, I didn't go as far as I did on Les Mis, where every single lav mic was painted out. What I said to Pablo was, look, if I can hide a lav, I will. And I'm not going to go carte blanche lavs on the outside. But what I can tell you is with Galinda, with Ari's costumes, it's going to be lavs on the outside for, let's say, 80% of the film, because her costumes are so intricate and so noisy. And Pablo Hellman, the VFX supervisor, just so happens that he is a lifelong musician, plays in a band at the weekend. And when I started explaining to him about how Clothing Rustle would destroy these original performances, he was just like, look, I get it. I'm with you. I'm painting these lavs out. So that was it was wonderful having this collaboration with Pablo. Not only did we put the 2 lavs on Ari on the outside, but what we did was I wanted to know that wherever Ari turned her head, she would be on mic. Because the thing about lavs is, as you know, they're not following and the thing about a musical is, because of the choreography when people are singing, there's likely to be far more radical head turns than if someone's doing dialogue in a dialogue scene. You know, you put a dialogue lav on pretty centrally, someone's going to move their chin like I am now, okay? It's not going to, but suddenly you're in a dance scene and someone's singing live and it's going to be, I'm looking over there and I'm looking over there. And you need to make sure that that vocal is captured. And so what we did with Ari was we had a lav on the left and a lav on the right, so that we knew that wherever she turned her head, she was on. But also we had this secondary dividend that these 2 lavs paid, which was, despite the fact we had the lavs on the outside, there's still a little bit of clothing rustle because those costumes were noisy. And what it means is that Nancy Nugent-Title, who was dealing with the vocals, and Robin Bainton, who was also dealing with the vocals, if there was a tiny bit of rustle on the left mic, they were able to rescue that syllable and comp it together like we would a pop vocal, and they could rescue that syllable from the other lav mic. So we were basically getting twice as much usable dialogue and singing. Now, so that deals with why Ari had 2 lav mics on. Now, with Cynthia, it was slightly different. Cynthia, we had the most perfect lav mic you can ever imagine, and it was in the brim of her hat. And the wonderful thing about a lav mic in the brim of the hat is we don't have any of the issues that I've just displayed with someone turning their head, because that lav mic is locked to their head, just like a boom mic would be, but it's closer than a boom mic could be, even on a close-up. It's not got any clothing rustle because it's basically locked in place in the brim of the hat. And it's just, let's say, an inch above the eyebrows. And what that means for a lav is, especially if we're talking about a DPA lav, it means that it's going to sound like a close-up boom. It's, you know, those things, the response is so flat. They don't have this mid-range boost that old school lavs used to have. They were designed for recording string instruments in concerts. So they're pretty flat from 20 to 20. And what they sound like in a brim of a hat is a close boom. But What I couldn't do, and what would be completely against everything that I try and do on a movie set with regards to supporting actors and original performances, I couldn't say to Cynthia, if her instinct was to take off the hat at any point, Cynthia, would you mind? Then we're going to lose.
Don't do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we had a second lav mic on her at all times, which was pretty central up here. Now, on some of her costumes, there was a place to hide that lav mic, so we didn't need to paint it out. But on at least 50% of her costumes, it was just flat across the front here, and there was nowhere to hide. And if I'd have put it underneath that thick velvet, it just would have sounded muffled. And so on those costumes, we had the lav on the outside, and we color matched so that on the wide shots, Pablo wouldn't see them because, it's black on black on black. But when we get into the mids and the closest, Pablo was very aware, and he could just basically, when I say paint them out, they're not even painting them out now. They're just doing pixel replacement. It's not an expensive process. And you know what's interesting, Glenn, and this is something that I can't speak enough about, and that is both removal of a lav mic and additional dialogue replacement costs money. Okay. But one of them has a creative impact. ADR potentially has a creative impact if you're going to have to get the actor in to re-record what everyone was happy with as a fantastic performance. Oh no, that's no good. We've got a muffled lav or whatever. To get them back in, it's going to cost money, and it's got that, it's got that issue where the performance may not be the same. But if it's a pixel replacement to remove a lav mic, it only has that financial penalty. It doesn't have a creative penalty. And so what I think is smart about using VFX, not just to build these fantastic visual worlds, but to help the sound protect these original performances. It's using modern technology as best as we can to make better movies and have audiences believe original performances, because it is the true performance on the set.
I think that's very well spoken. Simon, before I let you go, I just have to ask sort of an emotional question. What's it like for you as the production sound mixer on set? You've got your headphones on. When you hear Cynthia and Ariana sing a song like Defying Gravity, and you're kind of the first person it's getting to your ears first. Tell me about that sensation of just being on set and having kind of performances like that coming at you.
Well, the first thing is, I had no idea that when Cynthia and Ari sung together, their voices would mesh the way that they did. And something very, very special happens when those two sing together. And I knew that they had beautiful voices, but what I can't explain to you is that first time when I had my cans on and they were duetting and the hairs on the back of my neck started standing up, and you get that tingle, and you just, as a sound mixer, you just kind of go, oh my God, we've struck gold. This is really, really something very unique and special. So immediately I heard them sing together, that I was struck by that. But on many, many times on Wicked, I had tears rolling down my cheeks as I was mixing. And they were tears because the emotions had got to me, and I was immersed in what I was watching on my tiny monitor, and and the story that they were telling with their expressions. But there was also tears because I knew that sonically that I was being given this opportunity to record something very, very special, something that it's a career, for me, that's a career defining piece of work. And I knew that I may not get another opportunity to ever record something as unique as this. So for me, it was just incredibly emotional. It's kind of like the holy grail of being a production sound mixer when you start recording two people singing like that together live on a movie set.
Congratulations. The work is amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the Dolby podcast today to talk us through your process about capturing it. It's such a triumph.
Oh, thank you very much, Glenn. It's a real honor, and thanks for having me on.
Many thanks to Simon for joining us today. And an extra special thanks to our friends at Universal Pictures for helping us put this conversation together. You can now stream Wicked at home in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos ahead of Oscar Sunday, which is March 2nd at the Dolby Theater here in Hollywood. You can find links, as always, in our show notes. And speaking of the Oscars, if you'd like even more conversations with fellow Academy Award nominees in this category and others, be sure you are subscribed to Dolby Creator Talks. Many of these awards are tough to pick and predict, and we will continue to offer in-depth interviews with unique insights into the world of these nominated artists. And that might make it just a little bit easier for you to fill out your Oscar ballot, whether you are an Academy voter or simply want to do better in your annual Oscar office pool. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. If you're curious to know more about what we do at Dolby Creator Lab, head on over to dolbycreatorlab.com. There you'll find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of the show, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Marroquin. Thanks for joining us.